Someone get this liaison officer a coffee and a seat in the back. The adult to try and solve a real problem here. The crowded Joint Operations Center fell into a tense, embarrassed silence. A few junior officers exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared challenge the colonel. The object of his scorn, a lieutenant commander with a nameplate that read Sharma, didn't even flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on the cascade of encrypted data scrolling down her terminal, her posture a study in disciplined stillness. She was an island of calm in a sea of rising panic. But when the four-star general at the head of the table, a man who had seen 3 decades of conflict, glanced over and saw the way her fingers rested on the keyboard, not typing but poised like a concert pianist waiting for the conductor's cue, he saw something else entirely. He saw a weapon waiting to be deployed. If you believe that true strength is measured in results, not volume, type competence below. The problem was catastrophic. FOB Griffin, with its 578 souls, had gone dark. A massive solar flare, amplified by enemy electronic warfare, had severed every satellite link, scrambled every radio frequency. They were blind, deaf, and alone, deep in hostile territory. Colonel Davies, a man whose career was built on logistics and PowerPoint presentations, paced the floor, his voice a booming instrument of performative authority. He spewed jargon and demanded solutions, rejecting every suggestion from the technical experts as too slow, too risky. He saw Sharma, a small-framed woman seconded from naval intelligence, as a bureaucratic placeholder, an inconvenient piece of administrative furniture. With all due respect, Commander, he sneered, making the rank sound like an insult. This is a Tier 1 crisis. We don't have time for theoretical analysis. We need kinetic options, not data points. His words were a public dismissal, a clear signal to everyone in the room that her contribution was worthless. Still, she said nothing. Her silence was profound, a vacuum that seemed to absorb his arrogance without reflection. She simply continued to watch her screen, her breathing even, her focus absolute, a silent professional in a room full of noise. An urgent, garbled fragment of a drone feed flickered onto the main screen. It showed the outer perimeter of FOB Griffin. A massive enemy force was massing, preparing for a final assault. The timeline had just collapsed from hours to minutes. Damn it, Davies roared, slamming his fist on the table. Scramble the QRF. I want every available asset in the air now. A young Air Force captain spoke up timidly. Sir, without guidance data, they'll be flying blind. We could be sending them into an ambush. We have no way to talk to them or the FOB. Davies' face went pale. He had no answer. It was in that moment of complete, terrified silence that a calm, quiet voice cut through the tension. I have a solution. It was Sharma. Every head turned. She hadn't raised her voice. She had simply spoken into the void. She pointed to a secondary monitor displaying what looked like gibberish. This is the carrier wave harmonic from the solar flare. It's not just noise, it's a medium. I can piggyback a series of cascading, microburst data packets on the interference itself, using an experimental quantum-entangled comms suite. I can create a temporary, self-healing mesh network between the QRF, orbiting assets, and a single, hardened terminal inside the FOB's command bunker. I can give them a voice. Davy stared, dumbfounded. That's theoretical. That's not a real protocol. General Madsen's voice was gravelly and final. Do it, Commander. What followed was not an act of war, but a symphony of pure competence. Sharma's hands, which had been so still, became a blur of motion across a specialized keyboard. She didn't look at the keys. Her eyes were locked on the raw data stream, her focus absolute. She spoke into her headset, her voice stripped of all emotion, a pure conduit of information. Echo 1, this is Nightingale. Stand by for data squirt. Authentication, key Zulu 9 Tango. I'm painting your target grid via your floor's tertiary input. Do not acknowledge. A line of green code flashed on the screen. Handshake confirmed. Then another, and another. She was weaving a digital thread through a hurricane, her commands a staccato of impossibly technical instructions. Vulture 6, adjust trajectory to 2-7. Niner, I'm slaving your munitions to my terminal. Fire on my mark. She was playing a three-dimensional chess game across a battlefield she could only see in lines of code, orchestrating aircraft, drones, and ground forces with nothing but her intellect. The room watched in stunned awe. The cacophony of panic shouting was replaced by the soft, rhythmic clicking of her keyboard and the quiet intensity of her voice. In the deafening silence of the command center, a miracle was unfolding, one line of code at a time. 578 lives hung on the precision of her every keystroke. The main screen, once a static-filled nightmare, bloomed with life. It showed the view from a Reaper drone. Enemy armor, precisely targeted, erupted in fireballs. Attack helicopters, guided by an invisible hand, swooped in to decimate the advancing infantry. A clear, calm voice crackled over the speakers, the first voice heard from FOB Griffin in 6 hours. Nightingale, this is Griffin Actual. We have you. My God, we have you. The relief in the command center was explosive. Officers cheered, hugged, some wept openly. Colonel Davies stood frozen, his face a mask of utter disbelief. How? How is that possible? Who is she? He looked at her not with arrogance, but with a dawning, terrifying confusion. General Madsen walked slowly from the head of the table, his eyes never leaving Sharma, who was already running post-action diagnostics, her work not yet done. He stopped beside Davies, his voice low but carrying the weight of 4 stars. You're asking the wrong question, Colonel. You shouldn't be asking who she is. You should be asking what she is. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on the entire room. He looked at Sharma's unassuming profile, the quiet professional who had just rewritten the rules of modern warfare in under 10 minutes. General Madsen turned to face the entire room, his gaze sweeping over the assembled officers before landing squarely on Colonel Davies. For the past 5 years, he began, his voice a low rumble of authority, NATO's most classified operations in denied access environments have had a ghost. A whisper, an operator known only by the call sign Nightingale. This operator pioneered a new form of warfare, what she calls asymmetric signal warfare. She can turn an enemy's greatest electronic advantage into their most crippling weakness. She can build a communications network out of thin air and static. She's the person we send in when the impossible is the only option left. He walked over to the central console and brought up a personnel file. The screen filled with blacked-out, redacted lines, but the header was clear. Name, Sharma, Anya. Rank, Lieutenant Commander. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Special Classification, Tier 1 EWO, Electronic Warfare Operator. The room went utterly silent. DevGru, SEAL Team 6. The Legends. Davies' face lost all its color. This wasn't some liaison officer. This was one of the most elite, highly trained, and deadly operators on the planet. Madsen looked at Sharma, who had finally finished her work and now stood observing the successful rescue operation on the screen. He did not offer a handshake. He squared his shoulders, stood at perfect attention, and rendered a sharp, formal salute. Commander Sharma, he said, his voice filled with a profound and unmistakable respect. Thank you. Your actions today saved every one of those soldiers. The story did not leak, it detonated. Within hours, the legend of Nightingale was on the lips of every operator, analyst, and pilot from Bagram to the Pentagon. It wasn't a story of firepower, but of intellect. It wasn't a tale of brute force, but of impossible precision. The 578 soldiers from FOB Griffin, now safe behind friendly lines, spoke of a ghost voice that had appeared in their headsets, a calm, steady presence that guided them through the chaos, calling out enemy positions and coordinating air support with chilling accuracy. They called it the voice of God back in the JOC. The atmosphere had been permanently altered. The culture of loud, chest-thumping certainty had been shattered, replaced by a new, more sober understanding of what true competence looked like. Colonel Davies, stripped of his arrogance, was a changed man. 2 days after the incident, He approached Commander Sharma as she was packing her gear. He didn't make a scene. He just stood before her, his posture humbled, and said, "Commander, there is no excuse for my behavior. Your professionalism. It was a lesson I desperately needed to learn." "Thank you." Sharma simply nodded, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. "We all had a job to do, Colonel. We did it. There was no ego, no I told you so." Her response was as clean and efficient as her work. In the weeks that followed, the legend grew into institutional memory. The after-action report became required reading at the Naval War College. Analysts deconstructed her methods, attempting to reverse engineer the genius that had turned a solar flare into a weapon. They named the technique she invented the Nightingale Protocol, and it was immediately fast-tracked into the curriculum for all Special Operations Signal Intelligence courses. But the most powerful symbol of her impact was far less formal. In the center of the JOC, where the main screen had once shown only static, someone had printed out a single line of the code she had written, the initial handshake packet that had pierced the electronic blackout. It was framed and mounted on the wall. Underneath it, a simple brass plaque was affixed. It didn't bear her name or rank. It just said, "Silence is the loudest sound of competence." It became a touchstone, a silent reminder for every officer who walked through that room. A reminder that the most critical voice in a crisis might not be the loudest. A reminder that assumptions are the enemy of victory. A reminder that true professionals don't need to announce their presence. Their results speak for them in a language that everyone, from the lowest private to the highest general, understands perfectly. A year later, the Nightingale Protocol was standard operating procedure. It had already been used successfully in 3 separate covert operations, saving dozens more lives and ensuring mission success where traditional methods would have failed. The story of what happened that day was now folklore, a teaching tool used to humble arrogant new lieutenants and inspire quiet, brilliant analysts. New recruits at Fort Bragg and Coronado were told the tale of the unassuming liaison officer who, with nothing but a keyboard and her intellect, had single-handedly saved an entire battalion. Colonel Davies was now one of the protocol's biggest advocates. He transformed his experience of humiliation into a crusade for a new kind of leadership, one based on listening and respecting expertise, regardless of its source. He often used himself as the cautionary tale, a public example of how prejudice and ego could blind a commander to the greatest asset in the room. Commander Sharma was gone, of course, reassigned to another classified project, another impossible problem on the horizon. She left no statues, no portraits. Her legacy wasn't carved in stone. It was encoded in the digital DNA of modern warfare. It lived in the quiet confidence of the young SIGINT officers she had mentored, who now knew their value was not in their volume, but in their precision. True legacy is not a monument you leave behind. It is the standard that continues forward. It is not found in the thunder of cannons or the roar of a commander's voice, but in the quiet, methodical keystrokes that turn chaos into order. It is the calm in the storm, the signal in the noise. The world is full of noise, of loud voices demanding attention, of arrogant assumptions masquerading as strength. But the architects of victory, the true pillars of any great endeavor, are often the silent professionals. They are the ones who do not speak of their qualifications because their actions are their resume. They do not demand respect because their competence commands it. They prove their worth not with words, but with results. The story of Anya Sharma is a testament to this truth, that in the critical moments when everything is on the line, the person who saves the day is rarely the one making the most noise, but the one whose quiet, focused competence shines brightest when the lights go out. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where precision defines a hero's worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.